There's a reason the oldest artifacts we've got are made out of it. There's a reason that humans have interacted with it since before anatomically modern humans. It is rough. It's hard. It's semi-permanent, far more permanent than we are, at least. So symbolically and metaphorically, when we look at like the whole mineral sphere through that lens, we see that it it gives us, sympathetically, that kind of idea of sympathetic magic. We use the enduring quality of stone to allow ourselves to endure whatever it is that we're going to face. Beyond that, of course, there are specific ones that have their own kind of symbolic and metaphorical ways we can interpret that, that give us the kind of individual characters or personalities of our different gems. But the other way we can look at this is through the metaphor of energy.
Hello and welcome to the first Spirit Box of 2025. And we have a really interesting episode to kick off the year with. Today we welcome author and practitioner Nicholas Pearson to explore the fascinating topic of his new book, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense. And if the year is going to be anything like it has been so far, and we're only on day 8, we're going to need all the psychic self-defense we can get. So Nicholas shares how the endurance of stones can symbolise resilience, how their structure helps us organise and stabilise our energy fields, and we dive into the magical properties of stones like Labradorite, black tourmaline, obsidian, and we discuss how they can filter, they can ground or deflect certain energies. The conversation takes us into some of the deeper areas of spiritual significance around stones and their connection to the Earth's history. And Nicholas emphasises the importance of wonder and encourages finding stones that resonate with you as part of your practice. When he reflects on the incredible stories that stones tell us about deep time, time in a way that we find it very, very hard to conceptualize given our lifespans. Against the timeline from which stones have been created and how long they've existed on the earth. It's really interesting perspective that I found quite illuminating. Now, in the Plus show, we discuss some of Nicholas's personal experiences from encounters with spirits and the intelligence within the stones, to managing a university museum collection where he once identified a rare radioactive mineral. And we also talk about divination with pendulums, which I'm a big fan of, and overall discernment with one's work and spirit encounters. So join us as we explore the intersection of geology, magic, and deep time. If you want to know more about Nicholas's work and indeed pick up a copy of the book, then do check the show notes. Equally, if you want to hear the Plus show or pick up a copy of my book, then also check the show notes. Right, let's get on with the show. Nicholas Pearson, you are very welcome to Spirit Box. Lovely to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. Bantanita from Inner Traditions reached out. I think it was just before Christmas. Reached out to me with a copy of your new book, and I was absolutely fascinated by it. I've been following you for a long time on Instagram. But Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, I've got it here in my hands. 145 gemstones for banishing, binding, and magical protection. What a fabulous title. I love it. And, I think it's one of those areas like protection that it's almost kind of like once everybody stops making sigils for magic and for new partners, they kind of realize, okay, this is the layer I need to really start to kind of delve into. So before you tell us all about, I've got the intro wrong for everybody who's going to listen now. But before we get into that, can you tell the people a little bit about you and your work, and then and your new book? Then,
yeah, I'd be delighted. Thank you so much. The short version of my bio is that I really like rocks. Period. But I feel like that doesn't quite capture the whole essence. I've been a rock hound since I was a kid. I remember just compulsively picking up rocks everywhere I went, really exotic places like the seashore. I lived in a little coastal town, so that was like a weekly venture for the family, because it was a 10-minute drive. Really exciting places like grocery store parking lots that have the little gravel sections. Just I enjoyed the tactile sensation, and there's something's just so reassuring about stone. And I guess my grandfather observing this and also observing my fascination for my grandmother's like vintage turquoise jewelry collection, he gifted me a piece of quartz that in no uncertain terms kind of altered the course of my life. Here was this thing that looked like something I'd see in a fairy tale or a picture book, but I could hold it in my hands. It was real, it was solid, it was luminous. There was something really magical about all of the angles and faces. So I really just wanted to know everything I could, from the geology to the folklore and everything in between, and that has been this kind of continuous narrative through my life. I was really convinced I was going to do other things with my life, and that this was just going to kind of be on the side. I started teaching workshops on like crystal healing and crystal folklore at the ripe old age of 18. I had no business doing that. I think I didn't have enough life experience to really do much other than spew out memorized facts and patterns that I saw. But I eventually went away to university to study music, and was, as the paperwork said, I was randomly assigned to work at the Earth Science Museum on campus, which I didn't know existed. I picked the school for its really prestigious music program, and once I finally realized that if I showed up to this assignment, they would pay me. I figured, okay, well, let's go find out what this museum is. I figured I'd be, shelving people's artwork from the building next door in the visual arts department. And turns out it was not at all what I expected. So I came in already loving rocks and minerals, and they almost gave me free reign. The only thing I didn't have was like database credentials, but I could go into the collection management system and just have just hours and hours of bliss every week. And my boss finally convinced me, seeing how dissatisfied I was with studying music and how much stress it was giving me. She thought, you should come to the dark side, like come study science, be in this field. So I did for a bit until I ran out of money and did
Yeah.
other things with my life. But the minerals have always been there. And eventually, when I was working the big boy job and doing the corporate America thing,
Hmm.
I just kind of had one of those little ideas in the back of your head that won't shut up, and it just keeps going and going. So I wrote a book, and then I've written a few more, and that eventually led me to this project, which I actually started in 2019.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was coming off of writing what is to date my most popular book, Crystal Basics. It came out in 2020, but when I finished the manuscript in 2019, immediately, because I don't like a too big of a gap between projects, I thought, what is the thing people ask for more than anything else? And just like you said, once they kind of get their taste in the magical world,
Hmm.
it's always protection. And for many people, the first step into the magical world is protection, because all the mundane things aren't providing them the sense of emotional security to go along with
Right.
whatever physical steps they've taken. So,
Yeah.
the psychology of protection is a really important motivator here. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, we'll do a protection crystal book. I've got different themes all over the place. I think this will be kind of a good feather in my cap. And then 2020 happened, and 2021, and all of these ensuing years,
Hmm.
and the project got derailed by real life. I was working full time and kind of witchy shop here in Central Florida. I'm still there, just very
Right.
very far removed from full time, and just being amidst so many people experiencing heightened concerns for their personal and community based kind of
Right.
security protection was really eye opening. So I I really wonder what this project would have looked like if I'd started it last year instead of
Hmm.
4 5 years ago. Because I think having this whole experience behind me, I might have started and ended in different places. But
Right.
um, it it had to be on pause for a while. I actually wrote two other books and they came out, and then I picked this one back up, and then put it back down, I think twice more before it finally got finished. But it's one of those things. I've been a sensitive person my whole life, for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Um, the in every sense of that word, when you're really young, kind of exploring the spiritual side, it's very easy to just go full speed ahead and not learn effective things like
Hmm.
grounding and centering and psychic hygiene, and you become a little too open, and it fries your circuits. So I've been there, and I witness people do it on a weekly
Mm.
basis. So I have empathy for that. I also don't have a lot of patience for it anymore because I figured it out myself. So I wanted to have this book that kind of meets a lot of different people in a lot of different places. And hopefully it does that in a way that is accessible. The goal was, some people, the healy-feely folks, I'm one of those too. There are things that they're definitely going to find of really great value in here. And then our occultier folks, I'm also one of those, are going to find some other things that I
Mhm.
think are of value in here. And along the way, I decided I wanted to have some really strange rocks. I wanted to incorporate some things that I have fallen in love with during my travels.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's this like patchwork quilt of things under that umbrella of protection or psychic self
Mm.
defense.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, you know, because I think you have, you know, it's really comprehensive. Like, you've got so much in here. Like it's really well put together. There is, I think, so much in here. If you're, as you said, coming from that kind of that healy kind of feely, side of things, or um, the more cult element, there is definitely stuff in here that people will not be familiar with. So I think you've aggregated a great body of work, and of course, it's not just kind of like this stone does X. It's way more involved, way more detailed. You've broken it down. You've got those kind of directory elements, but also, um, you've got reversal magic, you've got offensive magic, the dealing with spirit stuff. That was great. The way you've broken it down, really kudos to you, because I think it's one of those ones that you have looked at this from, okay, this is what you're going to need, right? And it is that kind of go-to breakdown of all the areas, of all the pitfalls and things that are going to happen. Like, and it's really robustly put together. You must get a lot of questions, right? You must get people messaging you all the time going, this happened, what would you recommend? All that kind of stuff, right? You know, I might be projecting somewhat, so bear with me. But where are the areas that you get those kind of questions that would have informed what you put into the text?
You know, a lot of the face-to-face stuff that I got in that really immersive work, that's the best word, the nicest word I can use, that
Mm-hmm.
immersive period where I was just, 40 plus hours a week interfacing with a very stressed out population. And I count myself among that really stressed out population that period because we were all feeling it,
Mm-hmm.
personally, collectively. And so just witnessing what was working for people in real time and what wasn't. And that was really a big thing. I have learned from my own experience what works for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that, especially those first 2 years in that COVID era world, 2020 and 2021, it gave me the opportunity to see what wasn't working for other people whose situations in life are different, whose orientation to the world is a little bit different than mine. But ultimately, this book is kind of a mixture of trial and error for myself
Mm-hmm.
and good advice I've gotten from mentors. There's quite a bit of like folkloric elements that got woven in, and the folkloric stuff is great because it works. We know it works, or we would have forgotten the folklore. It would have changed. The narrative would be different if people decided, no, iron's really not good for spirits. Tin is much better. Then we'd be using tin implements in our
Mm-hmm.
protective magic. But so it's one of these like things where I had to weave together a lot of different threads. But at the end of the day, sitting down and doing the work myself, sitting down and experimenting, the kind of, I'll say, more new agey elements of like crystal grids and things. Some of these come from like mentors and
Mhm.
dear friends of mine. The late Judy Hall was kind of an expert in this field of psychic self-defense with crystals, and she left a great body of works. And it's like, okay, well, Judy's already done this. How do I do it differently?
Mhm.
What can I do to like update this for this situation we're in, or how can I incorporate what I've lived through, which is obviously different to what she's lived through because we're
Mhm.
just different people. And so there's that part of it. But then there's also like the just getting my hands messy and I mean this as reverently as possible, making stuff up, like just trying a thing and seeing if
Yeah,
it
yeah,
works
yeah, yeah.
repeatedly and over again.
Mhm.
And sometimes you get great success, and sometimes you go, well, tradition says I should have done it differently. Let's go back to that and
Yeah.
start from square one. So, yeah, it so many different elements went into figuring out what works and what doesn't. And although at the end of the day, I'm the author, so there's bias. What works
Mhm.
for me is
Mhm.
primarily what's in the book, but I wanted to ensure that I really listened to and responded to what I saw
Mhm.
in the field in real time.
Yeah. Fabulous. And one of the points you made in the book about it being ultimately like accessible tools, that like you can in some instance literally go down to the beach and find some of these tools, which I really loved. That was a great point. Um, so kind of more broadly speaking, you touched on kind of like the timing in terms of like between now and COVID. We've had a bit of a kind of a roller coaster ride in the timeline, you know, um, which doesn't look like it's slowing down anytime soon. So like the importance of ones like you mentioned, like psychic hygiene and psychic protection. They're of value, I think, to everybody, practitioner or not. Um, so I think for those of us out there who aren't hugely familiar with using stones and crystals and in the way you are, what is it? What is it about crystals that protect you like that? Your psychic field or your energy field.
Yeah, there's a few ways we can look at this. So let's start with like what should be the most obvious to us. Rock is really enduring. There's a reason the oldest artifacts we've got are made out of it. There's a reason that humans have interacted with it since before anatomically modern humans. It is rough. It's hard. It's semi-permanent, far more permanent than we are, at least. So symbolically and metaphorically, when we look at like the whole mineral sphere through that lens, we see that it it gives us, sympathetically, that kind of idea of sympathetic magic. We use the enduring quality of stone to allow ourselves to endure whatever it is that we're going to face. Beyond that, of course, there are specific ones that have their own kind of symbolic and metaphorical ways we can interpret that, that give us the kind of individual characters or personalities of our different gems. But the other way we can look at this is through the metaphor of energy. And crystals are, by their very definition, they're highly ordered substances. And minerals are just naturally occurring inorganic crystals. Rocks are aggregates of minerals themselves. So this like crystallinity, this regularity is a big part of what makes their materiality so special. And if their physical makeup is so regular, so predictable, so organized, then it stands to reason that energetically they are also organized and regular and predictable. And what little bit of exploration has been done on this, scientifically speaking, suggests that this is true. And so we are anything but organized, at least energetically speaking. I mean, if you saw the top of my desk, you'd see that it was more than electromagnetism at work in my disorganization. Um, but when we introduce, theoretically, when we introduce something so organized to us, we take a crystal whose body is perfect, whose field is perfect, and we allow it to communicate in one sense or another with our energy body, then we can kind of treat it like a tuning fork. A tuning fork, when we strike it and we hear the pitch, it doesn't magically make your guitar string or piano string or your brass instrument perfectly in tune. You have to make an adjustment. But when we hear the correct pitch, we can see how far away we are from it. So that like beautifully broadcast sense of perfection brought into our field is like that tuning fork. And energetically, we're making those adjustments to kind of sync up with it. And the more coherent an energy field is, the more regular it is, the less susceptible it is to outside influences. So in a really like broad kind of sweeping sense of it, any rock or mineral supports our kind of psychic self-defense, because becoming similarly organized energetically makes us less likely to be disrupted by outside influences, because it's like all the parts of us are marching in step. There's no chinks in the armor that things can get through, and that allows us to experience a sense of balance and grounding and peace and safety everywhere we go.
When you mentioned kind of folklore and earlier, and kind of that's that that's some of the body of knowledge and human experience that we kind of throw the pail into and see what we can pull out. What we often see in, I suppose, in kind of like in pop culture, like in movies, we've all seen that kind of the hokey kind of '90s movie with kind of the witch's circle with the pentagram and kind of the quartz crystals in the corners and what have you, in the points rather. Um, you know, is there a hierarchy of what is the silver bullet, as it were, of protective crystals?
I'm the kind of person who tends to shy away from superlatives only because human beings are complicated. And the very best stone for anything for me might look different than the very best stone in anything for someone else. But bearing in mind there's nuance here, we can look at trends, right? So I think I mentioned iron minerals. Iron is alchemically, historically, mythologically linked to the planet Mars. We think of Mars as god of war, ambition, drive, motivation, movement, and that's great when we need to mobilize defenses on any kind of level or another. We can turn to this martial influence through iron in a lot of different ways. So maybe that's hematite, which is an iron oxide, pyrite, which is an iron sulfide. We know that is fool's gold. We could also look at things that have smaller amounts of iron in them. Maybe the iron is just responsible for its color, like bloodstone, or carnelian would be a good example. And not every iron mineral is necessarily reddish or metallic, but those I think are some that kind of stand out. But when we look at the kind of energetic nature of iron has this kind of descending quality to it. There's a lot of heft in iron-rich minerals, particularly like the oxides and sulfides and things that are like lots of iron in them. And this weight that they've got is this reminder that we are also in communion. If we look at the effect of gravity, where does it lead us? To the earth. So iron minerals help us kind of bring our awareness into this human earth relationship. And if we do that effectively and meaningfully, then suddenly it's not just us going it alone. It's us working collaboratively with the planet, the spirit of the earth, the consciousness of the earth mother, whatever we want to use to psychologize or romanticize that. And things feel a lot smaller when you compare them to the planet plus you rather than just you. Some other stones that I think are really great protection stones that have widespread appeal. One of them is Labradorite. I keep one by the computer at all times. If I have to leave the house, I usually wear some. From one angle, it is brownish, grayish. If we backlight it, it's not got any kind of exciting color to it at all. However, it has this interesting property of thin film interference, wherein there are these kind of laminae that occur, little
Right.
twinned layers of crystals. So when light moves through, it gets scrambled, kind of like an
Right.
oil slick. Um, and this allows it to kind of filter out certain energies, just like it's reflecting back or
Oh
diffracting
wow!
back at
Right.
certain wavelengths of light, can also diffract out certain kinds of energies that may not be so helpful. And yet other frequencies come through unimpeded, so it becomes a kind of selectively permeable membrane. It's
Hmm.
a breathable kind of protection. It's not a solid wall that nothing gets through, because those are actually really unpleasant in the long term.
Hmm.
Like gauze on a fresh wound, it needs to breathe.
Right.
So that's one that I really love working with. And I'm also just a big proponent of finding what's in your local landscape, or finding what's in a landscape that is meaningful to you. I do
Hmm.
a little bit of both. I've got, very prominently in our home, we have a very large chunk of this fossil laden and crystal encrusted limestone from the aquifer underneath our feet practically.
Hmm.
But I'm also really fond of the rocks of the British countryside. So you'll find a lot of flint in our home. You'll find
Hmm.
a lot of chalk and slate and other things that have
Hmm.
come from these places that speak to my soul and feed me on this kind of deep level.
Yeah. Yeah. Down where I am, it's all kind of flint beaches and the kind of the south coast of England, which is a really happy hunting ground for hagstones. They're everywhere, So
Yeah.
it's a beautiful pastime. I take my children down the beach looking for hagstones, and then trying to see fairyland through it. But actually, you mentioned hagstones in the book
Mhm.
as well. Um, I like that, working with the local stones. I think that's a really potent way of approaching things. And in terms of people who might be new to this, um, like, what would your advice be? I mean, me going to the local beach looking for hagstones is probably a good example, but I'm coming from that, from a kind of slightly kind of a witchcraft and folkloric perspective. Um, if you're not coming from that angle, if you're a brand new um, person, entering kind of this field, and they pick up your book, what would be your kind of takeaway? Try this and this and this, or is there one? There may not be.
Um, I tried to, in the director part of this, I tried to include at least a sampling of common rocks. So you've got things like slate and marble and granite
Yeah.
and flint and chalk. Um, so if if we're seeking to commune with the rocks of our local landscape, we can try to base it on those textbook definitions that are in
Yeah.
this or other resources. But I think it's way more exciting to open that space of connection with the stones, and that doesn't necessarily have to look like communing with an indwelling intelligence, although
Hmm.
you just
Yeah.
maybe not calling it that. And my favorite exercise for this is to just practice wonder. Go find a rock that you like.
Mm.
Maybe it's a hagstone because it's got a hole in it, and that's pretty cool. And statistically
Mm.
speaking, that is not super likely in a lot of
Mm.
geological environments.
Mm.
Maybe it is the way a particular piece of like foliated metamorphic rocks and schist sparkles because of the mica that's in it. Maybe you find something like granite that's got some little hunks of garnet in there. Just
Mm.
find something that excites you, and really like pay attention to where in your body, where in your mind you feel that sense of excitement or connection.
Okay.
Start to notice what it feels like to hold it, and then put it down and notice how you feel when you're not holding it. Compare that to other things that you know, and you kind of start to build up this like lexicon of their subjective qualities, but you get this like language that emerges of how stones feel. That's essentially what I did before I knew what the mechanics of like the human energy
Mm.
body and the stone's energy body interacting were. It was really just feeling it out, and I didn't have a lot of language to describe the process. But nowadays um, I can't be left alone in a place where there are a lot of rocks. um, they will end up in my pockets. As long as I'm not breaking any laws, they will end up in my
Yeah,
pockets.
yeah. No, I like
Um,
that.
and I think like the element of wonder is the biggest part of it. I was
Mm,
listening to a podcast like years and years ago, and I don't even remember which show it was, but someone was interviewing Phil Hine, the chaos magician,
mhm.
and he talked about how important awe is in our spiritual practice. And it like just clicked for me in a way it never had. And you know, that's been kind of one of my guiding precepts
Right,
ever since. If my practice is devoid of wonder, it is devoid of meaning and therefore devoid of effects. Like we can
right.
go through the mechanics of I'm gonna, you know, put this piece of pointy obsidian at my front door to protect me because symbolically that's what it does. But if I have no joy in the process of communing with that obsidian, if it doesn't excite me when I open the door and see it, then you
Mm,
know, what am I doing? So when we want to connect with the stones of our landscape, I think they are equally, if not more exciting than the fancy and precious gemstones we find lining the shelves of crystal shops.
mm.
And it's just a matter of knowing how to look for that. And it means you either have to be really good at like bullshitting yourself in the beginning to just look at an ordinary lump of stone and go, oh, this is really exciting. Or
Yeah.
you have to think like a geologist. It doesn't mean you have to like go get a qualification in geology, but just learn about your local landscape. What are the forces involved in creating the peaks and the valleys, and you know, carving out the waterways and the movement of sediment? Just like the barest minimum of Googling that, you learn so much about how big the passage of time has been and those huge forces at play over eons. That also makes our problems feel very small because they are so ephemeral by comparison.
Mm,
And it helps us appreciate that stones go through so much. They experience so many changes in the earth, in the world around them. And so it kind of goes back to that sympathetic magic of like they resist the erosive nature of time itself in some cases if they're durable enough rocks, and if they're you know chalk or sandstone maybe not, but um, it's so magical to think about the story of the earth that every single pebble tells. And even if you never really sit down and learn the geology, can you imagine the story? Can you make one up in your head? And that like exercise of romanticizing the stone is so powerful because if you can do it with a little piece of flint that you found on the beach, you can absolutely do it with an exotic piece of
yeah.
amethyst from Brazil or an emerald from Colombia. Like it's so easy to do with
Hmm.
the really flashy, exciting ones.
Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense. Yeah, and I guess that kind of leans into, some of the practice side of stuff that you lay out in this book and also in your others. We were just chatting beforehand. I thought you'd done about 4 books, but you're knocking on the door of 10, which is remarkable. That's
Okay. It,
I really admire that, but that's incredible.
there are moments it feels exhausting,
Yeah,
like a I'm going to change my language. Like a really motivated person, I've just started book number 12.
yeah.
But you know, I got to admit that after 2020, when this book kind of
Mm,
experienced some hiccups, um, I felt like I was slowing down big time to only release a book once every year or every other year. And that's been like the weirdest psychology to work through myself. Like this hustle culture, this productivity mindset,
yeah.
that you know the good values of Protestantism have inherent in all of us, whether or not we are. Because I was definitely not raised that way,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
religiously speaking. So it's so strange, but I think the couple of pauses I've experienced over the last few years have been
mhm,
really good for focusing on what brings me joy. You know, it's the same
mhm.
thing. Like that pebble excites me. Why doesn't
Yeah,
this manuscript?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good shout. I love that analogy. I never thought about like stones in or crystals in that way of the kind of the eons of time, the like countless human lives that these things have existed, alongside us, or we're deep inside the pressured earth, and then that led to their formation, and all the kind of like the improbability of their formation as well, like these really specific conditions that are required for what is quartz, have why is it quartz instead of amethyst, or what's it called, is it citrine,
Hmm. Hmm.
when it's like amethyst but it gets excessive heat and it goes kind of like a browny orange. I think that's the name. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
it's so improbable. It's amazing, really.
There are some things that when we learn the geology behind them, it is extraordinary we ever get to experience them at all.
Mm.
Jadeite, the more precious variety of jade, hypothetically, if it occurred in any other kind of host rock, none of it would ever reach us because
Oh
its
wow.
density is so great that it forms in these like ocean subduction zones. So you get, plate tectonics 101. The crust is made out of movable plates. They sometimes crash into each other or get stuck underneath one another. So when these two plates reach in deep under the ocean, some seawater gets drawn in, which has some important ingredients in it. And if the other two kinds of rock are just right, the immense pressure and therefore the immense heat produces these metamorphic events that can produce jade. However, this jade is so dense that as this rock is getting subducted, if it were just solid jade, it would eventually sink into the mantle and melt, and that would be it.
Wow.
But jade occurs as these like seams and nodules inside a much lighter kind of metamorphic rock called serpentinite. It's rich in serpentine. Um, and it's almost like the chips in a chocolate chip, or the fruits in a
Right.
figgy pudding. The rest of it is much less dense, so it can eventually get pushed up to the surface somewhere
Mhm.
eons later down the road. And it's just if one tiny little factor in its formation was different, no jade. That's it.
Mm.
Just
Mm.
it would all get consumed by the earth, and something else would happen instead, somewhere else down the line. And
Mm.
it's
Mm.
it's incredible that all of these factors, it's miraculous in a way. Just
Mm.
because we understand the science of it doesn't take away any of the magic from me. In fact, I think it enhances it to see these stories. And
Yeah,
that
yeah, I get that. Yeah, definitely. I used to think similar about hagstones. Just how many times, particularly down where I live, where these stones would have to be tumbled in the wash of the sea. These tiny impact. Did it take millennia, a century, or 10,000 years to form and then create, and then just beat this small hole through the stone that didn't destroy it, and like, particularly things like flint, you hit it at the right angle and it's like, some straight across. So it had to be like, again, it's just like 10,000 improbable and precise strikes to create this hole. It really is, when you think about, you really made me think about the time element of it. That is, I can see the potency of it in a different way. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, in geology, we call that deep time. That's a really common expression you see, especially
Sweet.
in like that popular approaches to it.
Yeah.
We have to think about time in a whole new way. So
Mm.
it gets that expression deep time because it's just so much farther. It goes so much farther back than we can conceive of.
Yeah.
There are rocks on my shelves. There are rocks on a lot of people's shelves that predate Homo sapiens, that predate
Mm.
hominids altogether. Some that predate life.
Wow.
It's just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, that is mind blowing. Um, from totally changing tack a little bit, um, from a practical sense, what would be your kind of recommendations for protecting one's home? I think you mentioned, is that Labradorite? You mentioned Labradorite. That's something you take on your person. It's something that's kind of always relatively near you. I remember, I'd be given these things by family members, like um off on various different kind of traveling bits, like amethyst angels, and I think it's an onyx, little onyx pyramids. I think that's it. Yeah, that is it. Like, but if you can see that, um, what are like say your kind of spread of go-to recommendations for people if they want to take away something from just listening to this show and right, I can do X. What would those things be?
Yeah. So, for our person, pick a rock that you really like, that makes you feel good, preferably one that we know is protective, although in the broadest sense, anything that nourishes us
Mm-hmm.
allows us to fulfill our boundaries more effectively. And start with what you love, because if you love it, you'll be inclined to work with it. It's perfectly acceptable to go through the book and find something whose textbook definition sounds like it's exactly perfect for your situation, and oftentimes that'll do a great job. But then when you get to the store and you pick it up, you're like, this doesn't excite me. Go involved in that. Maybe we'll call it psychic attack. Maybe we won't. You might look for something that can be maybe a little bit more deflective, something like hematite, jet,
Okay.
obsidian. And then when it comes to protecting our home, this is where I really love turning to our humble kinds of rocks for a few reasons. If I tell you that you need very expensive amethyst geodes at the four corners of your home, most people cannot do that.
Yeah.
But if I say, hey, do you have any flint in your backyard? Can you put four flints in the four corners of your home? Can you go get some maybe inexpensive quartz crystals or inexpensive pieces of rough tourmaline that you could put there? Those are really great options. One of my dear friends in the crystal world, Sue Eustace, she has a great shop, great business up in like New England called Zuzu's Healing Arts. She's hosted me for events over the years, and she's a big proponent of selenite. This hydrous calcium sulfate mineral. It's gypsum, but prettier. And she puts it on the four walls, so not necessarily
Right.
the four corners,
Right.
but on the walls. And because most of the selenite we have access to, and silly me, I don't actually have one, it's just out of arm's reach, but a lot of the stuff we find is fibrous. So it's
Right.
these long compact fibers. They're fiber optics. If you shine a light at one end, it travels all the way through. But that kind of linearity of it, when we put it on those four walls, it's like we're kind of creating this stream of energy, of
Oh,
light,
okay.
of protective
Yeah.
influence. And
Yeah.
so I like to marry that with something also in the corners, because in many ways, um, more is more in my life.
Yeah.
More is not better, but I do like more of something. So um, those are like really simple things that we can
Mhm.
do. The book has a lot of different household grids for different circumstances. Maybe you suspect you might be the target of someone's ire, or something. There's grids specifically for that. Maybe you want to focus on bringing some movement and lightness to your energy. There's grids for purifying the energy of your home. There's also just general warding, and it comes in a lot of different forms.
Mhm.
I tried to make those with things that weren't too expensive, mostly because I do understand the kind of consumer side of crystal healing is uh, challenging. It's unique among spiritual practice, uh, especially those that are becoming more mainstream. It basically requires continuous investment. You're constantly buying new rocks. Every
Right.
crystal book introduces a new crystal to you, and you want them all. And I'm guilty of that myself. But really focusing on what we might already have in our backyard or in our collection, or is fairly easy to find. So I there are of course some weird and exotic things in there. I can't help myself, but I really wanted to make as many of those grids with pretty affordable elements as possible.
And are there certain types of crystals that protect it, like against like harmful or disruptive kind of energies?
Yeah. So historically, we can look at a couple of principles that can guide us in this. One is um, the folklore of things. We've mentioned iron. Lots of iron minerals are great for this. We can also look at fighting fire with fire. So what are stones that maybe either through their material form or their chemical makeup or something about them feel kind of dangerous, kind of noxious? And I want to preface this by saying there are indeed some really toxic minerals out there that require safe handling, and we should be mindful of that. Um, Even I do not collect radioactive minerals. Maybe we'll save that for the after show, but I have a horror story. Um, but when we look at that principle that we find also in sympathetic magic, like attracts like heals like, fighting fire with fire, lots of
Yeah.
different ways we can think of it. We find in magical herbalism the use of baneful plants to combat baneful situations. So we can do the same with rocks and minerals. So maybe it's lead minerals like galena, which is fairly insoluble in acid and fairly safe to handle. Don't ingest it, but like not
Hmm.
ingesting rocks is just good advice generally.
Yeah.
Um, there's not many you can ingest. It's salt, and
Hmm.
that's pretty much the end of the list for
Yeah.
most of us. Um, but I tend to the kinds of things that I work with in my everyday practice are ones that I I find some magic in. There are some like real unsung heroes in this situation as well that I think get neglected because they're not as exciting or valuable. So like bronzite is one that I love recommending to people who might be experiencing psychic attack or even just kind of going through it in life in general. You know,
Right.
someone doesn't always have to be responsible for making life unpleasant. We don't have to try to externalize the source of that. Like
Hmm.
life just sucks sometimes and it's okay. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not okay, but like if we make peace with the fact that it happens instead of trying to find a deeper reason or
Hmm.
trying to find something to blame, then we're not externalizing our agency in the process as well. So bronzite is one that I work with a lot for this, and it's a metamorphic rock made out of an iron rich
Hmm.
ensitite. And it's kind of bronze colored and a little bit flashy when polished, but otherwise not super exciting. And there's because it's undergone these processes of like um, immense pressure, it's uniquely qualified to help us when we feel those same kinds of pressures in life.
Right.
There is still a softness about it, so it encourages us to not harden too much when we experience challenges. It's so easy to come out on the other side a little bit jaded and more suspicious of the world. And I feel like bronzite simultaneously deflects harmful energy. It's almost like, you know, the waiter brings down the wrong entree and you're like, no, I didn't order this. You don't just sit there and eat it. You send it
Hmm.
back to the kitchen and get
Yeah.
what you ordered.
Yeah.
It's not because it's malicious intent to send something away.
Hmm.
So bronzite does that, but at the same time, it gives us permission to be gentle with ourselves and um, to hope for a world where the goodness is still intact. You know, two things can be true at the same time. The world is dangerous, and most people in it are fundamentally good.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that they always act with our best interests in mind. I mean, I don't even always act with my own best interests in mind. I'm a human being.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so if I have the grace to embrace both of those things simultaneously,
Mhm.
I can keep myself, you know, full of those healthy boundaries and not be a jerk if things don't go right.
Yeah. Okay. That makes an awful lot of sense. Um, I love how you describe how this love affair and this kind of the this, I guess, life path, evolved from you from childhood fascination, and I really relate to that. I have a large wicker tray which is still at home back in Ireland, um, just covered in interesting rocks that I've brought back from kind of beaches and hikes and stuff like that when I was a kid all over Ireland. Um, and I was so desperate to find a fossil. I was just obsessed by fossils. So there's I'm not on the Jurassic coast here. It's further west, but we got some decent fossil beaches. But I still get this sense of utter elation, even when I just see like fossilized seabed. You know what I mean? When it's like kind of like quote unquote not the most visibly stunning fossil, right? It's not kind of not an incredible animite or anything like that. Like, but I still get that kind of that frisson, that kind of lovely thrill of seeing it. Because it brings me back to that again, that sense of time, which I never really had before. I never thought before till you kind of brought it up about that deep time around crystals and minerals and stones more broadly. which I think is a fabulous thing for people to take away. Like it does literally that the weight of time embodied in this object. Going through that whole thing of that you described by being protected and kind of like gentle protection. What's it called, bronzite? Is it
Bronzite, yeah.
bronzite? Um, in like sometimes these things can get messy and aggressive and you know you catch a person on the wrong day. They may have that kind of whole nuclear approach to things like in terms of that kind of defensive mechanisms. If there's a red button moment, what does that look like?
Yeah, this is one of those topics that I think is actively avoided in crystal literature, and I I really struggled with whether or not I would include these kinds of things and how much of it I would.
Sure.
And ultimately I thought, the average reader probably is going to take my advice and say, you're not likely to ever need this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but for the exceptional situations where people are in dire straits, want a little extra help, or want to go the extra mile, wouldn't I love to help them find resources that level the playing field a little bit better? I mean, magic has always been a tool of the oppressed
100%.
to
Yeah.
negotiate imbalance of power and similar dynamics. And historically, we do find a number of, we'll say, minerals and mineral derived substances that are used for more baneful and malefic kinds of
Right.
purposes. But like modern crystal literature just glosses right over that in history. But we find things like curse tablets, binding tablets, from that kind of like Hellenistic period, and all through the Mediterranean and beyond. I mean, there are tons
Yeah.
of them in Southwest
Yeah.
England, in Aquasulis or Bath, mostly made out of lead. But there are dozens of
Yeah.
these that we found on the island of Cyprus that are actually carved into crystalline selenite, gypsum.
Okay.
And here's this crystal that we associate with light and goodness, and it's a very soft mineral. It's softer than our fingernails, it's easily scratched, and it was precisely that softness that probably encouraged people to want to write on it.
Right.
And so there's a binding spell in the book that's based on this very, very old historic use of gypsum as a substitute for lead in binding tablets. We can also look at, maybe we'll reserve some of these things for less valuable stones. So maybe we'll pick a rock out of the local countryside and essentially dedicate that rock to being a representation of the target of our magic, and coil some black yarn or cord around it as tightly as possible, squeezing out any places where light can get through. And imagine that as we do so, we're tying up the agency of the target to perform harm. I'm pretty specific that when I do these things, the goal is always harm reduction.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily judge people if their ethos look different. My practice is informed by my experience and things, and other people's will be informed by theirs.
Sure.
But I think
it's a very sensible approach. It's a very sensible approach. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so one of my mentors in the magical world, Christopher Penzac, when talking about production magic in class once, he used the analogy of like ricocheting bullets. And he says, like, honestly, if you are skilled enough to psychically bounce that bullet back to its sender, you're also psychically skilled enough to just snatch it out of the air. So why let innocent bystanders get caught in the ricochet? Why piss someone off by sending the bullet back? Because now they want to retaliate for having retaliated. So my goal is always harm reduction. And if we can do that by neutralizing harm, that's the first step. But other times, like, that's just not effective. The power dynamic is too great, or someone is relentless. It happens. I've met those people. And so, there's some heavier stuff that's in the book. And I my hope is that maybe the Healy Feely crowd, less comfortable in this kind of thing,
Yeah.
will recognize that the world is an enchanted place, but enchantment isn't always pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and on the flip side, maybe our dark and spooky occulty friends, they'll also seek some of
Mm.
the magic and levity that's in the earlier
Yeah.
chapters of the book.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think a rich and varied practice is
Mm-hmm.
way more exciting than when it's one flavor all the time.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so. I think you've landed that, by the way. Like when I was going through it, like I loved that binding spell, by the way. Like it was one of the like, and how you phrased it. So we spoke about it at the top of the show. That kind of like just the objects to hand, and that kind of like true, like for me those true witchcraft spells, that are what I have. You know, generally as a very, very poor rural person. That's well, generally. So I thought that was a fabulous spell, really, really nice addition. And you go into an awful lot of detail around like the binding and like the kind of protective work. You got like layouts and houses, but you've also got layouts on people as well for I guess for kind of like shielding work and taking things out of people that shouldn't be there, that kind of thing. Um, I suppose maybe we can take that into the plus show now. So that time's about right. For people who want to pick up a copy or follow you, find out what you're doing, courses, talks, the like. Where's the best place for them to find out?
So anyone who wants to catch up with me and learn about everything I'm offering, my website is theluminouspearl.com. I'm also at the Luminous Pearl on most social media. I spend more time on Instagram, but I exist on other platforms, at least for the time being. And I try to make sure that I've got some current updates on future events. I do like weekly lives on Instagram as well, most
Cool.
weeks, sometimes more often when I'm bored. I have free time. That's the word we're going to use. Uh, but I really love using that platform to do like the nitty gritty, crystal and other topics that come
Right.
up. So that's a great platform for it. And I do teach quite a lot. This year, I'm kind of reimagining what that might look like with 2 book releases and some. I'm also trying to do this work-life balance thing I hear people do. So I've been making space for things that are not work related that bring me joy, and that's interesting to plan around because some of them, like I make music now, and like I
Oh,
do
cool.
a lot of time, but it's a really big time investment to be a musician. So planning for that means I have workshop dates already through like
Hmm.
September, October, November for some venues. They're just not up yet because we're still working on copy and images and stuff. But I make all those announcements as I get them through. I've got a newsletter I send out a couple times a month that you can sign up for on the website as well. And I try to never make it an overbearing amount of email because I don't like writing them any more than you would like receiving that many.
Well, it's you're a busy individual. There's no doubt about it with that level of output. So I'm glad you're taking a break. I'm glad you're getting some other stuff in there as well. Congratulations! It's a really interesting read, and I'm going to have this as a resource for a long time. This is yeah, really, really great. I think it's a one of those things that should be a stable for a lot of people. You know. So yeah, congratulations, Nicholas. I really enjoyed it, and I wish you every success with the book. Hopefully, it goes really well.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on the show.
It's been a real pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming on Spirit Books. Thank you, Nicholas. I hope you all enjoyed that. I really did. It brings me back to being a kid and just scouring the beaches of my hometown in County Dublin looking for fossils. I was just so desperate to find a fossil when I was a kid. And eventually I did find them. We didn't really have a huge amount of fossils on the beaches where I grew up. So they always have a special resonance for me. This is just, I guess it harks into the whole concept of deep time that Nicholas framed for us in the show. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to pick up a copy of Nicholas's book, and it's really interesting, he does really bridge the gap between kind of the kind of new age, or slightly kind of like the healing vibe with crystals, versus to the kind of the more cult witchcraft side of things. He does bridge that very well. There's some great little spells in there, ones that I'll definitely be using and adding to my repertoire. I'm going to leave it there. I'm Dara Mason, and you've been listening to Spirit Box. Take care. Talk soon. Bye.